Good day, everybody. How's it going out there? So, in this video, I was going to cover, I wanted to find out more information about a certain situation that happened at Biggest Little Fur Con, revolving around one of the other two incidences that we didn't cover last week. We covered the pizza thing last week, which is kind of the very shallow, this is what happened, and, you know, it was kind of goofy and stupid and silly, but not really anything too detrimental and serious. So I have to premise this with saying that there are thousands of people who go to each of these conventions, and for more often than not, people have a good time. I mean, these conventions wouldn't be growing if people were not having a good time. But things can happen, and problems can occur that harm individuals' enjoyments and experiences at those conventions. And the topic that we're going to cover today kind of goes over that a little bit. And so I think that instead of going over in depth of what happened at the convention to this individual in question, I'm going to point you toward a video by someone called Lockhart Arts, and they've done a very good job about covering controversial subject matters in the furry fandom, you know, sort of from a person who enjoys the furry fandom at sort of arm's length. I used to be that kind of person back in probably the early 2000s, mid 2000s. Like, I was sort of a person who enjoyed furry at arm's length and basically knew furry from interactions on the internet, and it is a different experience than doing it in person and finding, you know, friends groups and colleagues in person. So always be aware of that it is a little bit of a different experience. But I think that overall the video that was done by this other YouTuber covers the topic very well. I will put a link in the description below, and I will link to the timestamp in which he starts talking about that subject, because he talks about the pizza thing and the unfortunate incident at the same time. But for a summary, without going into too much details like that other video does, I will say this. So basically what ended up happening is that one of the convention attendees left the convention in duress because they had been basically a victim of sexual assault in their room, right, with their roommate. And they felt uncomfortable with going back to the room, so they basically were not able to get, you know, functional sleep, and they weren't enjoying themselves at the convention. They were basically losing their money gambling, and they left the convention in duress. Unfortunately, their duress and their frustrations, when they made their statements online about the situation that happened to them, they were so frustrated and under such duress that they kind of did the thing that sometimes happens when somebody is a victim of something, and they kind of stretched it out to be a bigger. They tried to see what the problem was and tried to solve the problem under duress. And when they tried to solve the problem under duress, they said some things that didn't nearly mesh with what happened to them. It kind of took shade at some of the cultural elements of the furry fandom, such as rainbow flags and, you know, preferred pronouns for transgender folks. And obviously those two things are not correlated. What happened to him in that hotel room and those things are not correlated. But sometimes when somebody is a victim of something, they see grand sweeping changes needing to be made instead of smaller, more iterative steps that need to be taken in order to prevent other people from suffering what they suffered from. And that's unfortunate. And unfortunately for him, the person who was abused and the person who did make those statements online, obviously people who are members of those communities who are not involved in such things and who, you know, are who they are and don't appreciate being who they are being insinuated with criminality, certainly boxed his ears about that. And so, like, there was this whole hodgepodge of fisticuffs going back and forth about the whole thing. But as I said, the other video covers it very well on what those issues were, the steps that occurred and why, and basically how the person, walked back what they said when they realized what they had done. And the thing about it is that I will say this: there are people who do use crime within certain groups to disparage entire groups of people. It's something that a lot of minorities and even in many religious organizations and many governments and many groups of people are very well familiar with. Leftists, like, I know the same people who are disparaging this guy for saying that it was the rainbow flag's fault for what happened to him are the same kind of people who will make jokesies about the Catholic Church because of the unfortunate incidences that happened within the Catholic Church. So, and the reality is that, being able to talk about those uncomfortable situations and those unfortunate circumstances is important, because as somebody who, obviously does fandom journalism, pseudo-journalism kind of stuff, and record keeping, to me, it's more important that uncomfortable things and unfortunate things, find the light of day, because then we know that those things happen, and therefore we can mitigate and make steps towards improvement. Sometimes it's not as sweeping as many people think it needs to be. I don't think, I think most furries and even the victim themselves, after further, introspection, didn't think of it as, oh, well, like, they didn't really think that rainbow displays and pronouns were the reason that what happened to them. He just didn't know what to, take of it, and unfortunately, he came from a background in cultural organizations that were, sort of, B / B kind of like those kind of places. But I think the thing of the matter is that in spite of their past, the fact that they would get into furry costume and come forward to furry conventions, shows some attempt at growth of character, even if, like, when worse came to worse, he found himself in a position that he didn't want to be in and was harmed for it, and didn't really, and some of that old stuff that some of that old, things that he was involved with came up under duress. But in essence, I think the thing of the matter is, it's important to talk about what is the most important thing to understand here, and that is communication. Communication and expectations and things like that are very important things to discuss in the furry community. But most importantly is when you're talking about going to physical conventions, is roommates. Roommates and who you room with is essential to your enjoyment of the convention. The very first convention I went to in Anthrocon 2011, I only went to the convention because I went with somebody I knew for my entire life, right? And they invited me along, so it was somebody I knew as somebody who I grew up with, right? And so, like, I could trust them to basically, as a roommate, I could trust them, they could trust me, because we knew each other very well. And I think that introduction to furry space really helped with solidifying my comfort in getting involved in those kind of things. Not a lot of people are blessed with that kind of opportunity, and that I was. So I think that the irony here is that, like, furry fandom does pride itself in a way in being open about talking about adult topics and adult communication and sexuality and identity and things like that. But the fact of the matter is that while it prides itself on being open about those uncomfortable talking things that most of society is uncomfortable talking about, the interesting thing about furries is that sometimes the simplest things are the things that furries have difficulty discussing, right? The things that the rest of the world sort of like understands by default is something that we as furries kind of have trouble communicating. And I think one of those things is boundaries. And boundaries are very, very important. What are you not willing to put up with? And as a roommate, it is essential that those boundaries are put down on paper or something. It's the irony to me that we have this thing called F-list, which for those of you who don't know is basically a list of adult-oriented kinks that, furries will make characters, or they'll put their own persona names down, and they'll list like everything that they like, they don't like, and basically list their boundaries when it comes to adult, mostly in the form of role play. But the funny thing is that we have a site like that, but we don't have a site for roommates, right? Like a room list kind of a thing. Like, this is what I like. I like partying. I like alcohol. I like beer. Okay? Like I don't like beer. But if Kavanaugh was to make a persona, right? If the Supreme Court guy, Kavanaugh, were making a persona, he'd put in his faves. I like beer and beer. So it's interesting to me that we don't have something like that where it's like I like partying. I'm okay with staying up till 3 a.m. in the morning, right? I get up at like 10 o'clock or so, and I expect things to be quiet in the morning hours. Whereas another person might be like, well, I don't like staying up till 3 a.m. I stay up till like 11, and then I go to sleep. And then I get up at like 7 or 8 in the morning. It's like what hours are you working with? What? And obviously the issue that this sort of revolved around with is expectations around sexual expression, sexual, connection, right? Or what are you looking for sex? Or are you not looking for sex? Is it like under no circumstances am I going to do anything with my roommates? Or do you want to do things with your roommates, right? It's and this is the funny thing. It's like as uncomfortable as this is to talk about, right? It is essential that it's talked about before you get into the room. Because as soon as you get into the room and things are going, it can damper your experience at the convention. I will tell you from personal experience, most of my conventions have been doing really good. I've only had one rooming situation where I didn't really do all that well. And it was the first time I was rooming with these folks. But in essence, they were like, hey, I like you, and we're gonna room together, and we know each other from doing a panel together. It's like, and I'm like, okay, sure. And then, more people got added on, people I didn't know, but I knew like one or two of the people, and I felt they were really good dudes. So I'm like, okay, sure. And then they're like, oh, this person's gonna room with us. And I'm like, okay, so that's 4. And then all of a sudden they about a few weeks before the convention, it's like, oh, this person's gonna room with us. And it's like, oh, did somebody back out? And they're like, no, they're just gonna room with us. And so I started to get the little red flags of but there's only supposed to be 4 people per room, right? I'm not gonna mention what the convention is. It's like, yeah, there's only supposed to be 4 people per room. And it's like, but this person's gonna be rooming with us. And then eventually it came down to that there were basically 6 folks in a 4-person room. You're not supposed to do that. And I'm a lawful good person. I understand why the rules are like that are in place. It's for fire safety purposes and stuff like that. And it's like it makes you feel uncomfortable because then you feel like you're sort of behaving in a criminal manner, right? And it's not something that I liked. It would have been if I had known it any earlier, I would have said, this is a line in the sand for me. I'm not comfortable with it. So I ended up sleeping on the floor, and I literally slept on the floor so hard, which, by the way, I could sleep basically anywhere. It's not a big deal. But I broke a key in half, right? And I literally slept on my keys, because I wear my keys around my neck, and I was wearing my keys. And I slept on them. I slept on my back, and apparently the keys went from around there, and it kind of went to my back. And I was sleeping on the floor, and when I woke up, the key had snapped. One of the keys I was wearing had snapped in half, and I'm like, oh man, I slept hard. Luckily, I had a spare one. But like, it was, I can sleep anywhere, but it wasn't comfortable, and it kind of started to feel gross because they were partiers too, and they weren't really cleaning up the room that well, and it was like, you started to feel a little scuzzy. I could tolerate it, but it was, it's one of those little things where it's like, I like having space, and I like having, it's like I don't like going out and experiencing a bunch of convention things and then coming back and there's a bunch of people, right? So I don't room with those folks anymore. I just don't. It was not a great experience, and it did temper my convention experience a little bit. I don't remember what convention it was or what my general thoughts was, but I do remember, the heckish kind of room experience. And for sure, like, putting down those boundaries and communicating those boundaries early on can very much cement, your ability to be able to weed out those kind of things before you go to the convention. It's very important that you do. Especially what you're looking for at the convention. If you're not looking for sex, you should absolutely confront your roommate about that before you head there. It's like if your roommate, if you know each other very well, if they're being flirty with you online, say like, look, I'm not interested in having sexual relations, right? And you need to be thorough and point that out before you get into the room space with them. And this is sort of why I personally, when I engage with people, and this is general advice, but obviously it's a very hard advice to follow for most people who are neurotypical and need to connect with people more than myself, who is neurodivergent and basically can do well enough on their own, is you should know the person for a good long while before you entrust with them, being a roommate with them and stuff like that. For me personally, I'd have to know the person and engage with the person and communicate with the person for more than a year. The other, like if I'm rooming with two other people, I need to at least know one of the people in that room for at least a year, personally. The other people can be people that know the other people and kind of do that like little fractal thing. Like the third and fourth roommate can know the other guy, and that's fine. But I have to have at least the foundation of one person that I know I can trust in that room in a platonic way, right? And I think that's important. And so I think that at the end of the whole thing, and the end of this whole rambling thing, I hope our takeaway is that as conventions start to run up again, that furries start to understand that different furries are looking for different things in our community, that they're looking for different experiences, and listing out those experiences and those things that people are looking for in their convention experience and looking for those things is important. And it's important to basically be upfront with them. Make it like an F list. Someone should design a document that's like, here's a room thing, and that might be something I can do. Like, here's a room form that you can build, and here are the rules, the room rules that I have, and like you would share these kind of room rules with each other about what your optimal room experience would be, and then you can kind of share them with each other, and then if you have differences of opinion, you can make some compromises before you sit your ground. You sit, yourself into the convention. Another thing, also, food and your food plans and your dinner plans, like that is something that absolutely should that you should try to settle before you go to the convention, at least for the most part. Like at least have one planned dinner with a group of furries that are going to be there, and plan it before you get to the convention. Don't plan it at the convention. It wastes time, it wastes resources. It's like herding cats. You've heard it all the time. It's like, well, I want to go to this place. Well, I want to go to this place. Well, I already ate with these people. Plan, if you have a group of friends that you know are going to be at the convention and you really want to hang out with, and you have like a little like niche, talk with them before the convention. Understand where they're going to be. Plan things out and have at least one planned meal. Improv the rest of them. You got to have a little improv when you're going to a convention. You got to have a little bit of leeway. But at least have one dinner planned out with people that are important to you. I think that's actually another good point, another essential thing that will help improve one's convention going experiences. So to the person who experienced that horrible thing on the convention floor at BLFC, as I said earlier in the video, I would actually, if you are, going to continue to enjoy furry conventions or want to join furry conventions, I would recommend not going to Biggest Little Fur Con anymore because obviously you've had a nasty experience there. Go to more family-oriented conventions such as Anthro Northwest or, furthermore, depending on where you are, I think you're probably more of a Western furry. If that's the case, then there are some more family-oriented or, PG-13 lower sort of oriented conventions and less party conventions out there. Obviously, think about talking with your roommate a little bit more, or if you plan on doing it, maybe get a room for yourself, because certainly it's going to be less expensive than, having to book a flight at random during like an unplanned, ticket change and things like that, than to rely on another person if you can't find somebody to rely on when you go back to your room, because it sounds like you needed headspace to kind of decompress after going out and doing the hustle bustle, but you didn't have that space to decompress, so you basically had a bad time of it. What happened to you shouldn't have happened to you, and I think it's important that furries engage in conversation to make sure that those things don't happen in the future, that boundaries are set and that those boundaries are important. Because what good is talking about sex if you're not going to talk about people's boundaries when it comes to their own bodies? That's like, there's no point at that point. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. Leave a comment on what you think about the situation. Do the algorithm crap, but to me that's not important, especially when talking about topics like this. So thank you guys very much, and we'll see you guys next week.